Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to next installment of the Community Engaged Research Series of the Center for Nonprofit NGO Studies. The center is committed to the growth and development of civil society for research, community engagement, and training the next generation of community leaders. Today, we have a very special presentation from Keri Burchfield in sociology, recipient of the Presidential Engagement Professorship. From animal crime to animals helping criminals, academic, advocate, activist, or all of the above. She's a professor of sociology and criminology at NYU. Primary research interests include communities and crimes, specifically investigating the effects of neighborhood structure and community organization on crime prevention and control. Recent research involves projects examining the link between animal violence and human crime in urban communities, as well as broader correlates of animal welfare. She also runs an animal-centric intervention at the Illinois Youth Center in St. Charles. So in his first spare time, she's an active volunteer at her local animal shelter and with Safe Humane Chicago, whose mission is to create safe and humane communities by inspiring positive relationships between people and animals. So, Keri, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And welcome to everybody virtually and in person. It's nice to see some familiar faces in both places. I want to start by thanking one of the in-person attendees, Laura Heidemann, for telling me about this opportunity and really community engaged research in general, because I've been kind of flying blind for the last 10 to 12 years, just kind of doing my thing and collecting the best data I could and putting it together in the best ways I knew how. And then a conversation with her led me to realize that I'm not the only one doing this research out there and running into some obstacles, but also experiencing some really positive outcomes from the work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both today. And I'm going to start, maybe if I can figure out how to move my slides forward. How do we move slides forward on PowerPoint or on Zoom? I should know this. Sorry, technical.
So you're not actually sharing this.
Oh,
Interesting.
oh, maybe.
And then stop share. Oh, you're screen sharing, that's why.
Oh, I'm screen sharing, not PowerPoint sharing.
Yes.
Okay.
There we go. That would explain it.
Aha. Okay, thank you. All right, so this is just the agenda for today. I'm going to try to run through these topics quickly and leave some time for questions at the end. So going back to the beginning, like really the beginning of sociology and the School of Sociology at the University of Chicago. It's the first American Department of Sociology. And even back then, the scholars involved in creating this department really wrestled with the question of how much we should be academics versus how much we should be activists. So they are observing all of the social change that was going on in Chicago at the turn of the century, and different scholars took different approaches to how much to get involved. I'm sure many of you have heard of Jane Addams with her work with Hull House, considered one of the first female sociologists in the United States, even though she was trained more as a community activist. And then you have Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay, who created some maps, much like the one that you're looking at here, although this one is much more recent, but recognizing the geographic distribution of social problems in Chicago. And Henry McKay was the data guy who created the maps, and Clifford Shaw was out in the community, working with community residents, hearing from them to try to ascertain what these communities need. I show you this map, which, like I said, is a recent map of Chicago poverty and gun violence, so that you can see how both are geographically distributed, but also correlated. It may be hard to see that the little dots are gun violence, and then the darker areas are areas of more and more poverty. But if we also compare that to work that I began in about 2012, we can see that there are similar patterns to other social problems. And in this case, given the subject of the talk, we're looking at animal-related issues and animal welfare. So this is a map from 2008, but it is the most recent we have for these data, looking at where most stray animals come into the city shelter in Chicago. And if you notice, there are some similarities between the animal intake and the violent crime and poverty. So this was the first time I looked at this data and thought, okay, there's something happening here. There's some association. And I really want to kind of get a handle on how this is sociological and how this is sociologically and criminologically relevant. So my first foray into working with animals and specifically animal crime was using Chicago Police Department data to just kind of get a sense of what's happening in Chicago, specifically with reports and arrests of crimes involving animals. So these could be animal cruelty, animal fighting, animal abuse, and animal neglect. And this map here shows also, similar to the gun violence, you see dots where the arrests are, and then the darker shaded area indicate more incidents, higher counts of incidents. So we see again a pattern. We see that a lot of these crimes are concentrated in areas that also had higher rates of poverty and higher rates of gun violence. So I knew that there was something sociological going on here, even though most research about animal cruelty to this point was looking at it from an individual level. So it was looking at particularly how individuals who commit animal abuse may go on or graduate, as they say, to commit interpersonal violence. But I thought, can we see those same relationships at the community, the city, or the state, or even the national level? And that has been my kind of research area ever since this first paper was published in 2016. And this is just a bar chart from that paper showing the correlation between areas where there's a lot of animal crime and areas where there's a lot of other types of crime, which tracks with this idea that animal criminals may also be violent criminals. But again, I thought, there's more to it here. And I also actually started my academic career wanting to be a veterinarian. So I've always had a love of animals. And so I really wanted to not just explore this issue, but and explore it sociologically, but try to become an advocate, because of course animals can't speak for themselves. So I thought it was important to begin to examine this issue and see how I could not just understand it, but actually do something about it. And for those of us who have pets, they're increasingly we are hearing surveys report that pets are family, but they are also many other things in our lives. They protect us. Some people use them for profit, either through fighting or breeding. And also in the law, they're treated as merely property. And so that has implications for the ways that we respond to these types of crime. This is a model of a process or an institute called One Welfare, and they have created this model showing the correlations or the linkages between human-related problems and community and socioeconomic and environmental-related problems. So this framework has helped me to move beyond that somewhat deterministic and simplistic link dynamic that suggests that animal criminals become violent criminals. There's much more to it than that. We know that animal cruelty is associated with domestic violence. My work has shown how it's related to community violence, but it's also related to things like poverty and incarceration, and more broadly to issues related to food safety, food security, environmental concerns. All of these play in together, and illustrate how animal welfare and human well-being and global humanity and safety are all interrelated. So as I was working on my criminological manuscripts using police data, I really, again, was thinking about how can I bring other people into this work and how can I advocate for the role of animals in society, but more specifically in sociology. I am trained as a sociologist, and so I was interested in creating a course that would bring animals into the scientific study of social interaction, which is what sociology is. So in 2015, I created this course, Sociology 330, Animals and Society, and I just have here an excerpt from the syllabus. And the course is designed to get students thinking about issues that many of us really take for granted in terms of the role of animals in our lives and the arbitrariness of those roles and the oppressions that are linked to animal oppression. So it is very much a sociological issue, not just the problem of animal cruelty, but the problem of animal oppression more globally is linked to many other forms of oppression. So we discussed that in this class, and we consider all of the different ways that we use animals in our lives, because at least currently, many people see animals as a tool rather than a being with their own thoughts and feelings and rights. So as I'm, growing my interest in this field and really wanting to take my criminological training and understanding and growing interest in the link between community violence and animal welfare, I learned of an organization called Safe Humane, a community-based organization that was designed to recognize that positive relationships between people and animals have the potential to make communities safer and more humane. So I started volunteering with them, and one of the first programs that I participated in was Lifetime Bonds. And I have a short clip here from an early film. I think this was filmed in 2005. But we can't bring cameras into the youth center. This is a detention center in Chicago. So I just want to give you a sense of what these programs look like. So I'm just going to play this short clip.
Bringing these boys from the Illinois Youth Center here, first of all, they immediately identify with the fact that they're behind bars. And they said, hey, we understand what you're going through. I got it, man. Things like that. Really very touching, because not only are they doing empathy and all the things that we care about the human animal bond, but they're talking about respect for life and respect for freedom.
They feel worse than the zoo animals, I think. They just be in a cage looking at each other, and it smells really bad. They all need a nice warm home on a Christmas day and tear up somebody's presents or something. Then they gonna be all right. I really didn't know too much about dogs, but I knew like that they fight. That's it. And now being here, seeing dogs that actually isn't always aggressive, and you like, man, you wish there's something you can do for them. And it's like, man, all they like to do, they like to play, have fun. It's like regular human beings.
Deshaun was afraid of dogs. Deshaun was so afraid of dogs that if a dog started walking toward him or even barked a little bit, he would jump a line. He wouldn't run after you. He'll go after that. He was a loner. He sat alone. He would come in alone. He'd sit in a chair alone. 6 weeks later, Deshaun is shockingly different. He comes in smiling. He wants to talk about what he's seen. We've been on a field trip to animal care and control. He wanted to talk about that experience.
I know they feel just how people in jail feel sometimes, like they don't want to be in cages, man. Like, man, I never knew it was so many dogs that was abandoned. Man, the population here of abandoned dogs is really large. So I think that if everybody come together, everybody can, help change that. All they need is a little attention, a little food and health care, and things will be all right.
What in the world?
Okay. back to my, wait, now I'm not going to be able to find my, wait, there, are we good? Okay. So this really kind of touched off something for me, and it got me thinking about what I can do in the community using my tools as a sociologist, using my passion for animal welfare, and using this organization that has already been doing such good work. So when I had the opportunity, oops, now I'm back. Oh, there we go. I took the model of lifetime bonds, the program that we had been running at the Illinois Youth Center for about 8 years. And I established a similar program at the Illinois Youth Center in St. Charles. And so through that programming, we bring dogs in from an animal shelter, whether it be Naperville Area Humane Society, Animal Care League, Tails Humane Society. And the young men learn about the power of the human-animal bond, the development of empathy, and compassion for others. And we talk about really important issues related to animal welfare in the United States, particularly pet overpopulation, and the stigma and stereotypes that surround a lot of the dogs that end up in shelters. So this is just a little bit about the program, which I kind of already said. So I'm going to just move on to show you some of our partners. So one of the things that I learned in doing this community research is that I already had many partnerships in place from my volunteer work. So I had partnerships with the Illinois Youth Center Chicago, which gave me some credibility to start the program at St. Charles. And then from there, we are now currently also working with DeKalb High School and Tails Humane Society. And so I'm just kind of always looking for opportunities and partnerships, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. So in this program, it's designed to, of course, give the young men, because in the youth centers that we work with, they are all young men, to give them some hands-on positive interactions with animals, because we know even just having positive interactions with animals reduces stress levels, so reduces cortisol for both the animals and the youth. And these are both stressed populations. Living in a detention facility and living in an animal shelter are highly stressful. So it is beneficial for both populations to have that kind of stress reduction experience. But we want to connect that to messages that these young men can take with them back out into the community, and almost, creating advocates with the work that they're doing and teaching them how to read dog body language, understand that dogs have feelings similar to humans. And by learning and cultivating that empathy, then they can understand their responsibility to address things like overpopulation through advocating for spay neuter and the problems of animal abuse and animal fighting, for example. So these are our weekly themes. So every week we try to highlight a social emotional learning concept and tie what they're doing with the dogs back to these themes that also relate to the work that they are doing. And we do use all positive relationship-based dog training. So there are probably as many methods of dog training as there are dog trainers, but we know that positive reinforcement is the most successful in the long term. And of course, we also want to educate and socialize these young men into learning how they can work and their dogs can work for rewards rather than work for punishments. We talk a little bit about the dog as an individual, and this is a kind of a pretty powerful sociological moment where we talk about the problems of breed stereotyping and the stigma of the pit bull. And we connect that, or I shouldn't say we, I mean, the young men actually connect that to how they feel sometimes for, being judged as somebody who has been incarcerated, as somebody who's a delinquent, or even being judged by the color of their skin. And so we talk about what that feels like and what the implications are for those stereotypes. So empathy is a really important feature of the work that we do. And the process of doing empathy in this work involves slowing down, listening, being present. All of these tools that we also know are important for things like stress reduction, again, both for the dogs and for the humans, and also can benefit the dogs in that when people are taught to listen to dogs, then the dogs don't have to speak so loudly in terms of growling, barking, biting, which when we're dealing with shelter dogs, that often means that these dogs are at risk of being euthanized. So I want to transition a little bit to talk about how I have done data in these programs. And I'm also wanting to get these little things off my screen, but I don't know how to do. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the lesson I've learned over almost 10 years of running these programs is that everything is data, because everything has to become data, because using the official tools of the quantitative sociologists, which I considered myself, just wasn't working. So when we started programming, we were lucky enough to have data from the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice. We had recidivism data. So we could track youth who were in our program and the youth who got out and stayed out versus the youth who got out and came back. Of course, we weren't controlling for anything. These were really convenience samples. And so we don't really know if there's anything like selection effects that, the kids who go through the programming are just probably going to be more successful in general. But it did give us a sense that, okay, the kids who go through the programming had less recidivism than those who didn't. From there, we developed surveys. So we did pre-test, post-test surveys looking at things like empathy and impulsivity. And we also measured the students or the youth's adverse childhood experiences score. And we intended to do that at the beginning of the programming and at the end of programming. But a lot of youth will get transferred, or they will get released early, or they won't come to every class because of something going on in the facility. So again, we were really kind of wrestling with how do we get reliable and consistent data. So we started measuring interactions in the class. I became more of a qualitative sociologist than I had been before. And we looked at the ways the young men interacted with the dogs, the way they talked about them, the way they touched them, and the way they write about them. So they have workbooks. This picture here is an excerpt from one. And we also asked them at the beginning and at the end of every class how they were feeling. We gave them a check-in and a check-out. So the check-in was, they're both out of 10. And almost universally, I can think of maybe 2 instances in about 150. Those scores went up over time. We can't attribute that solely to the dogs. It could be, something else about the programming. But nonetheless, it gives us a little bit to go on. And in the vein of partnering and working with other disciplines and looking for opportunities, I have recently started working with 2 other NIU professors who do work at the Illinois Youth Center in St. Charles. They are in the Department of Physical Education, and they run a program there called Project Flex, which is a physical activity and exercise program. And so with Dr. Zach Alexander, I have developed a tool called the SODA, or the Systematic Observation of Human-Dog Activity. So we are coding intervals in the programming, looking at things like how often the youth praise the dog, how often the youth touches the dog, pets the dog. Is the dog showing signs of stress? Is the dog looking relaxed? And so we've had both undergraduates and graduate students working in that process. to collect data that we are in the process of writing up a manuscript, a research note and a manuscript on this new way of measuring human-dog interaction. And that last point on the slide is just a note that there's always a tension between the desire to be a productive researcher, right? You know, to get the findings that you can put in the manuscript or you can put in the book proposal or the grant proposal, but that tension exists with what you are able to do in the field. And that's what I want to talk a little more about next. So I was lucky enough to get funded from Purina in January of 2022, specifically to develop a new curriculum that was social emotional learning and trauma informed. And our proposal included a randomized control trial and pre-test, post-test. But as you can, I kind of already gave it away that we ran into problems with getting the data, even though I worked with a colleague in Michigan who does a similar program. So we were able to pool our programs and get a pretty decent sample size. But we ran into a lot of obstacles, mainly due to staffing shortages and smaller populations post-COVID, and then the youth kind of coming and going. They get sick, they get into a fight. And even that tells us something about working with these populations and the need for advocacy for these incarcerated populations, as well as the shelter animals. And how am I for time? Okay, I'll wrap up in just a bit. So this is just some of what we've gathered from the youth themselves. So over the course of this work and transitioning from more quantitative based data, we have moved into qualitative and analyzing the reams of data we have from the workbooks. And then a couple of colleagues of mine, hi Jennifer, she's on the call here, are working on coding some data from focus groups that we did last year. So this question about, am I an academic? Am I an advocate? Am I an activist? I think that, in all honesty, I am all of the above. I don't think activism has to be a bad word when it is contrasted with academia. I think that we are perhaps a little too black and white about how objectivity might be clouded by being an activist. I also think I am in a somewhat unique position in that doing work with animals means that you literally are speaking for beings who can't speak for themselves. So I think many people who get involved in this work realize the need to speak up for the animals, as well as for the young people. And I'm also interested in the ways in which the work that I do with youth perhaps trains these youth to become advocates, maybe even activists. And research has shown that people coming out of prison who have a cause that they can get behind may actually lead to a reduction in crime and to less recidivism, because they have a new form of an identity, not just somebody who has come out of the prison system. But because this working with youth who are incarcerated and animals who are in shelters, it really has significant stakes for both populations. For the young people, we're trying to keep them out of that revolving door of the criminal justice system by giving them tools, and not just social emotional learning tools, but also vocational tools in working with animals. And for the animals, some of them literally never make it out of the shelter. So this dog on this slide participated in our programming twice and sadly was euthanized because nobody came to adopt him. And so that is part of the work, that is part of what we talk about, are the consequences of this work for the populations that we serve. So what have I learned? I have learned a lot about what I bring to the table in terms of who I am as a sociologist, who I am as a white female, who I am coming from NIU and the populations it serves. And that has led me to be much more open and aware of different voices and different norms and values related to animals in the populations that I serve. That has encouraged me to be much more open and open to a two-way communication between myself, my colleagues, and the populations that we serve, and really listening to, what they feel is important and what they want to get out of the work that we're doing. I also, like I said, am constantly looking for partnerships. So I've partnered with several colleagues here at NIU. I've partnered with dozens of undergraduate and graduate students, as well as local organizations in Chicago and here in DeKalb. And I bring my work into the classroom. So in my Animals in Society class, we talk about this work. We tour animal shelters and animal sanctuary. I have people come to the class to expose them not just to the issue of animal welfare, but to the work that can be done linking at-risk youth with at-risk animals. And I guess the biggest takeaway I have from doing this community engaged research, well, two things, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, which I think I did for far too long, worrying that I wasn't getting the right data. But also, and it seems kind of counterintuitive for a sociologist to say this, but don't underestimate an N of 1. Because sometimes that may be all you get, but that is no less significant. So that is all I have. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
So I want to push on this idea of scholar or activist.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I think we set up a false dichotomy,
Yes.
right? And I was wondering what you would think of reframing it as, right, our traditional scholarly process moves from having a research question through to a scholarly publication.
Yes.
And a lot of what we're doing in community engaged work is having a moral question that is influencing the kind of scholarly questions
Yes.
we ask. We're getting through the research process, but saying at the end, it's not enough to
Yes.
engage in the scholarly process. If we're informed by a moral question,
Mm-hmm.
what is our obligation to actually use our knowledge, use what we've learned in order to make change?
Right.
So this is how I've framed this up in my head.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you wanted to engage with that at all.
I think that's very well articulated. And again, something that I have probably just kind of stumbled my way to. You said it better than I could say, but yes, I think through my work with animals, the animals became the first focus. And honestly, as an animal lover, if I could have just kept it there, I probably would have. But I understand that we won't make any inroads in this process, in these problems, if we don't engage the community from which these animals are, being abused or returned to shelters. And it really is a human problem. It's a problem of lack of resources, of poverty, of racism. So it has become, the moral issue has stayed a moral issue, but become a structural issue for me, and has implored me to think about how I can engage both the animal welfare and the human welfare piece. But I think, yes, I always started from, and probably always return to, this question of animals are beings worthy of moral concern. And that is not something that everybody believes, but that is what I always come back to with my work. So thank you for articulating that, of like starting, and I think ending with that moral quandary. Yeah. Any questions online? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
From a piggyback off of Laura's question, about the engagement, and the history of sociology, including like activists, or at least advocacy in terms of like the problem. I mean, even going back to the thesis on Feuerbach, which is many people claim as one of the sociologist's ancestors.
Yeah.
About point is to change people.
Yes.
Not just to, as philosophers to study the world. But yeah, I wanted to ask what you thought of in terms of like the lesson that you learned. You started with a don't let the enemy, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's a connect that directly to your positionality, because someone who speaks with communities in Haiti, for example,
Mhm.
there is often a trope about being a voice for the voiceless.
Mhm.
The UN actually published after the 2000 earthquake, it was called The Voice of the Voiceless.
Yeah.
And the dilemmas of engagement are slightly different when your primary focus is on the human
Mhm.
interlocutors and not the animal interlocutors.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could connect those a little bit more and say like, how would you design this research so that it can be, what lessons can you share about engagement as a result?
With the animals or with the humans or both?
The exciting thing about your research is that it has, I mean, the participants themselves see the connection with
Yeah.
being behind the bar.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that creates like empathy.
Yes.
Like, if you connect in that.
Yeah, yeah. So I do recognize that, giving voice to the voiceless, one must be very careful of what that voice sounds like. And again, with the animals, with the non-human animals, we're doing the best we can. And I highlight that point. When we first start working with the dogs and the young men, one thing that becomes a teachable moment is that the young men always want to start talking to the dogs, like and calling the dog by their name and asking the dog to do things. And so one of the first things we have to say is, this dog may not know their name because they just came into the shelter and we just gave them a name. And they don't know what you're saying. They don't speak English. So they can learn words, but until you've taught them, they're just hearing, Charlie Brown's teacher voice. And so they understand that because they talk about how, I mean, sometimes literally the language they use, in this case, the slang that they use, may not be understood by everybody. And so we talk about the need to really deeply listen and, and use of tone becomes an issue too. So I'm speaking most, very directly to the voice part of things. But I think one thing I have learned that has been a challenge for me is not to proselytize about how any treatment of animals that doesn't involve them getting exceptional veterinary care and having, a limitless pool of resources for their health and their well-being, anything less than that is unacceptable. That some of these young men may have dogs that live outside. They may have dogs that haven't been trained using positive reinforcement, but that doesn't mean that they don't love their dog. They may see that, they may see the way they train and the way that they talk to their dog as love, even though I might not see it that way. And also, one of the biggest hurdles we face is with spaying and neutering animals. So that is just simply not something that is culturally valued in a lot of spaces. That it's seen that the animals want to have puppies. The female dog wants to have puppies. The boy dog, it looks more manly the more puppies he creates. And so while that is empathy in a way, and it is anthropomorphizing, it gives us an opportunity to talk a little more about, yes, you are advocating for your animal, but maybe you need to think about your role as a human and their role as a more oppressed being and not empathize to the point that they are suffering. So maybe stepping in and recognizing that spay neuter may not be what they want, even if we could say that they want it, but that it is for the betterment of the species. So there's a lot of opportunities for those kinds of connections, and I hope I addressed. Yeah.
I wanted to read a comment. I should.
Thank you, Keri, for all that you do for being an academic, activist, advocate, and inspiration. And my Van Hart and Jennifer Leslie as head up.
Yes. Jennifer.
Thank
Hello.
you so much for an amazing presentation. I wanted to hear a little more about the idea of some of these youth being advocates. I think that's so intriguing. And I was wondering, what were there any sort of phases that you could identify as they were progressing through the program? Or, do you know anything about after they got out, if they continued along those lines? It's just a really intriguing concept. I was wondering if you could talk more about it.
Yes, and it's something that we should explore. So Jennifer does this work
Yes.
down at University of North Florida. And it's something I came across as I was thinking about this talk. So I do see it in programming, particularly when we have the opportunity to have youth who have gone through one session and come back. And we've assigned them as mentor roles. And so they mentor the new youth who are participating. And we can see how in their mentor roles, they talk about some of the lessons they've learned about types of training that are appropriate, the way to talk to a dog, the way not to manhandle, why spay neuter is important. They take those messages. We have had a handful of young men who have graduated from the program and gone on to either work at an animal shelter or volunteer. And we see the way that kind of transforms their daily lives, really, because a lot of, as you know, a lot of the problems of recidivism come from these young men or these adults returning right back to the communities and the issues that they were dealing with before they went in. So in a kind of an ethnographic way, if we can understand how their identity might have shifted through this programming and seeing themselves as a quote unquote voice for the voiceless or an advocate, then it gives them a sense of purpose. And many, former offenders, I think like Shad Maruna's work has explored how that is really important for staying out of trouble, is having a sense of identity and a sense of purpose. It's so difficult to track these young men once they get out. And so I think that's just, an area that we need more information about, and opportunities and funding for things like internships and jobs in animal shelters. And that's something that I'm currently working on with the work that I'm starting right now with a high school in Chicago. Yeah, Laura.
Thank you.
Like one of the really interesting and challenging parts of your work, because you are doing community engagement in a particularly difficult way, in that you're doing community engagement in what we would call in sociology a total institution.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
So
Right.
a facility where you don't get to control your access to participants in your study, you don't get to set rules, you're having to follow sets of institutional guidelines that may change.
Yeah.
But you're also doing it with the segment population, the dogs, who are also institutionalized with their own bureaucracies, their own sets of rules and guidelines. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you manage these systems and the complex and maybe competing demands of safety, security, and participation requirements for the two.
Well, in full transparency, it's exhausting. And it is one of the reasons why I've taken a little hiatus from the youth center programming, because of those issues that you mentioned. That there's the volunteer recruitment, there's the fundraising for supplies, there is the getting the timing right so that the youth are free, we can get the dogs there, the volunteers are available. And then you do all of that, and then the facility calls and says, we've had a fight, we have to cancel programming for the day. So that I feel like sometimes I sound like I'm whining when I talk about just the bureaucratic complexities. I am very fortunate that the youth centers that we have worked with, they know this program. We've been doing it for so long that even when I started the new one in St. Charles, they gave me as much carte blanche as they could. And part of what that means is that when we run programming, the staff don't need to be there. And that's because we've been doing it for so long that they know that the youth love it and they stay busy. So there are, I think in the, 15 plus years I've been volunteering and running the program, there have only been 2 or 3, incidents, which were fights that were quickly contained. But so they know that they don't need security. So we don't have that like them kind of looming over us. But we do have to deal with, getting one of the biggest issues since COVID and as youth populations have shifted is we have a lot of youth that can't mix together. So, these 3 boys might want to be in the program, but these 2 can't be with this one. So, so there's those kinds of issues. And then with the dogs, it's also, you may have a dog that's been participating for the whole 8 weeks and then gets adopted on the 9th week, which is, what we hope. Or unfortunately, maybe something else happens and they don't come back. So we have to kind of shift gears in that way. So I think, the other takeaway for me is that I'm a very type A, structured, plan-oriented person. And that all pretty much has to go out the window when I'm dealing with these populations. But like I said, I think all of the partnerships I've cultivated have been as helpful as they can be and as compassionate and open-minded as I would want them to be. Yeah. Yeah, Val.
So maybe this is not something sociologists say. I mean, you talk a lot about how the relationships help individuals, like humans and dogs and everything. But have these programs shown any demonstrable effect on the institutions working with? Like, is there any effect on either the shelters or the correctional facilities?
It's a good question about the shelters. I think there are some studies that look simply at adoption rates of the dogs. But I don't know, I mean, that would be actually a really interesting question as far as how it might shape the values of the shelter. I mean, again, this is anecdotal, but I think all of the shelters I've been working with, like Tails, for example, I've been talking with them for 10 years and we finally got to work together a couple years ago. And I know Michelle, the executive director, has just been so supportive and has rallied her team. And so I think there's a sense of pride and excitement. As for the facilities, there are some ethnographic studies that look at the staff morale. And it suggests that these programs not only help the youth, but they also help the staff in, and some of them even, I've had staff in my programming that I've had to kind of say, the dogs aren't here for you. Like they're, because they'll want to get involved in like, oh, let me show you how I trained my dog. And we have to say, this is for the youth. But again, it's like that sense of pride. But yes, there have been studies that have looked at the improvement in staff morale and also the ways that the staff's perceptions of the young men change through the course of the programming. Yeah, so it's a good question.
So somebody who wants to learn this.
Yeah.
What you do, animals, I mean, those, the governments,
The proper
I
way.
think kind of a dog and the cow, but can you probably truly say the problem? Because I think in a way, it's important because something like animal time.
You say so. Sorry.
I think it's important deconstructing the area of animal crime.
Yes.
Now, starting this what is the problem?
Yeah, so, so you mean in terms of what animals are involved in the types of incidents that,
I mean, I look at it from all of that, a dog is a problem, right? I mean, like, almost kind of like, there's a history of, local laws, ordinances. And
Yeah.
so, but to me, that's really what the standing here, like, in a sense of, before you forget the time, you have to understand the idea of like, property.
yes,
Just in person, people say like, a person who like single people is
Yeah.
also things, right?
yes. And so, yes, the idea that an animal is property limits what the law can do if it's considered personal property. And my first kind of entree into these questions, and actually my entree into Safe Humane before I even started with lifetime bonds, was understanding that there are these beings that have been labeled court case dogs. That was something that Safe Humane coined that term. But up until that point, these are animals that have been confiscated from criminal cases. So they're treated literally as like evidence or property, like you would treat a gun or drugs that have been seized. And while the criminal case is playing out, the dogs sit at the shelter. And because they're property that don't belong to the shelter, they're not walked, they're given food and water, but that's it. And so a lot of those dogs suffered for a long time and ultimately were euthanized with no human contact because they were property. And so there are more programs now around the country that recognize that problem and will at least work with the judge in the court in the case to sign over temporary, exercise rights or socialization rights for the animals. But because they're seen as property, sometimes I think prosecutors are hesitant to take a case to court. Even just a citizen calling and making an arrest, because, oh, well, that doesn't belong to me, it's not my problem. But you asked about like the history. I mean, I think all of these problems are interrelated, and I think I personally don't know how we can expect to make much progress with crimes against animals, crimes defined by statute, if there is still so much acceptable cruelty going on, right? So there's all kinds of cruelty that is sanctioned, factory farming and battery cages and hunting and medical experimentation. And all of that contributes to seeing an animal as a tool or a piece of property. So it's not only dealing with the laws, but in this programming is just trying to emphasize the fact that these are living, breathing, sentient creatures, no matter how the law or the social construction has defined them. Does that help? Or yeah.
The whole person that the dog without evidence.
Yeah, yeah. So, other questions?
I mean, I do have a quick,
My instinct is still on mute.
Yeah.
That I can project for you. So
Thanks.
you mentioned a correlation between poverty, between violent crime and violent or violent against animals.
Yes.
And since my colleague teaches methods once a year for an jail and more often for sociology, I have her voice literally in my head.
Okay.
Maybe see this phrase. Correlation is not my causation.
Yes.
What is the relationship? Do you think?
Yes.
And if you don't have to get it, what kind of data do we do?
I think so, all of these graphs show historic and contemporary relationships in the city of Chicago, poverty and gun violence, stray animals. And the same study that produced this slide also looked at rates of animal cruelty, 311 calls to the police for animal cruelty rates. So there's all these patterns. I think structurally, it's just a lack of resources. And in many cases, it's, things like availability of veterinary care, availability of pet stores. Again, if you look at the other maps, they show that those kinds of resources are not available in these neighborhoods. When it comes to crime, animal and human in these neighborhoods, I don't have the data. It would be an ethnographic kind of study, much like Elijah Anderson did way back when in Philadelphia, because I think there's something going on here about nihilism and a lack of concern about life in general. And so, that is another kind of issue that we have to grapple with, is advocating for animals' lives to humans who maybe don't feel like they have somebody advocating for them. And I think in some of the communities that we are pulling participants from, that is a very real issue. It's just this kind of cynicism and nihilism about what life is and what life means. I'm not sure how you would measure that, again, other than with some interviews and qualitative research. But it's something that's just been in the back of my mind ever since I've been doing this work. Yeah. Laura.
Never ending questions, but I wanted to ask you two interrelated questions. So where do you want to take this as a community engaged project moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the next pieces are for you? But also, what to you would make doing this kind of community engaged work, with all of its challenges and frustrations, both on the logistics side of organizing, but also on the, scholarly productive side.
Yeah.
What would make this work more feasible, better supported for you? What would that look like?
Yeah. So I take some inspiration from my colleagues at Project Flex, the group I mentioned that runs several programs now at the Youth Center in St. Charles. And they now, I don't know how long it's been in place, but they actually have a physical therapy certification that they're offering the young men so they can take, and the Association for Professional Physical Therapists is involved in helping to identify gyms that will hire these young men when they get out. And so I'm really inspired by the kind of the follow through that they are able to do in that program, because they get a grant from the state because youth in detention are mandated to have X number of hours of physical activity. So there is this recognition that the work they're doing is necessary. So they get funding to help run the program. And I think last time I talked with them, they have something like 20 graduate students. So I have one. So I think if I could either pay like a project manager or several assistants, which I have in the past, but pay somebody to see this as like a part-time job, to be available to do all of the administrative work. I think that would be necessary. And then as far as what I would like to see happen, if I did have more resources, again, money to pay for internships for the young men, jobs at animal shelters. I'm not saying that it's not difficult work, but they're fairly easy to come by. And so if there was money to provide for transportation to get the youth to and from, and money to support like an initial internship, which is something we're working on with the high school, through actually Laura Johnson put me in touch. And so the school we're working with, we're hoping to get the program going so that if we get enough young people to participate, the end goal would be like an internship leading to a job. But because life always interferes, unfortunately, where the school is located, there is a heavy presence of ICE activity. So now, we're kind of tabling that. So, you know, yeah, so that's, devastating in more ways than one. But I also think that the work that Project Flex is doing, my graduate student is helping them in the spring. And one of the things that they're going to do is look at how programming affects free time. So they have physical activity programming, and then one of my graduate students is going to be working with them on an internship, and his job will be to code interactions post programming to see if there's some kind of like, just benefits, stress reduction, less conflict after programming. And I would really like to see that as well with dogs, and how does the initial programming with dogs create a kind of diffusion of benefits after the programming. So that's something I'm kind of thinking about for the future.
Thank you so much. It's been really inspiring. It's been enlightening, and I think there's a lot of really, really great directions in the future for you, and looking forward to reading what you write about this. So
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Keri. Thank you for your presentation. Next up, we have a webinar this Wednesday at 5, adapting Cuba's disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in Haiti. The title is Solidarity and Resilience. It's go.nau.edu/solidarity-resilience. Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, guys.